Okay, we're live.
Great. Okay, so it's 1 o'clock. It's 1 o'clock. All the best, everyone. We'll start the webinar and we'll wait for a couple of minutes just so attendees can come and join for the first few minutes. So good luck. Welcome. We are still waiting for, maybe we'll wait a couple of minutes. Welcome to those who are joining in for the 5th webinar of the Transitions in the Global South webinar series. Hi, Sergio. Good to see some familiar names. Yeah, so as we wait, I think I'll try to also encourage you to say hi in the chat. Consider this as a much informal kind of a webinar, informal kind of a conversation space, as we generally try to see this network. So I'll briefly also introduce the network quickly before we move into the presentations. And we have very nice panel today. And unlike our previous webinars, we have a slightly lengthier panel, which is great. So we have a very nice group of speakers today. And we are really looking forward to a great discussion for the next 1.5 to 2 hours. So today's, let me share my video. Hello, everyone. That's me. My name is Viposhi. I am a research fellow at the Science Policy Research Unit, SPRU, at University of Sussex in the UK. But my work has been mostly based in, well, looking at transitions in India and also Thailand. So I finished my PhD, and I'm currently working as a postdoctoral research fellow in different projects, both in Global South and Global North contexts. So that's me, and I will be co-chairing the webinar today with Rafael, and I would like Rafael to introduce himself. Rafael.
Okay, Vipashi, just please allow me to share my video.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, should be able to do that.
Okay, I'm sharing it. Okay, thank you, Vipashi. Well, my name is Rafael. I'm co-chairing this webinar with Vipashi. I've been working with the Global South, Transitions in the Global South working group since the beginning of the year on this series, and I'm very pleased to see some names here that I already saw in the previous webinars. I'm based in Brazil. I'm working on transitions in food systems, and I invite everybody here to join the Transitions in Global South working group. We're a volunteer work and self-funded, and we are self-organized. And if you want to help us with the work of making this working group happen, please just write us an email and we will be pleased to have you working with us.
Yes, thanks, Rafael. That was really good. And I was going to quickly maybe share my screen and introduce the group. So we are, as you know, we are so we are kind of an informal group. We are a thematic group within the Sustainability Transitions Research Network, STRN. So we are one of the thematic groups within STRN. And we are an international group of scholars mostly. Currently, we are almost 300 people organized in a Google group. So I'm sure many of you are part of this Google group mailing list that we have. So our main focus is, of course, this geographical focus of Global South, primarily in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, but also contextual Global South, because we also want to engage with scholars and those of you who are working with specific issues which are Global South issues, but also relevant in the Global North. So issues around inequality, issues around poverty, injustices, and so on are also very, very relevant, very central, irrespective of which geographical context you work in. So we were formed in 2015, so we are almost like 5 years as a network, we can say. But our key activities have always been this kind of engagement, scholarly engagement, webinars, hosting debates. We have Global South tracks in the International Transitions Conferences every year. So this is how we organize ourselves, and that's how we kind of that's the kind of activities that we do. We do have Twitter and an email address and a YouTube channel. And as Rafael said, we are completely voluntary and based on people who just write to us saying that, yes, I want to help. So people like myself, people like Rafael, we just came together just to organize this webinar, and here we are. So thank you for those who joined today's webinar, and I would very much welcome you to just write to us in this Gmail if you want to organize any sort of activities next year, especially once we finish this webinar series. We will always look for ideas and suggestions on what to do under the umbrella of this this Transitions in Global South network. So I'll stop sharing. That's the very quick elevator pitch on our network. So I think, yeah, so before we go to our first panelist, I would also like to say that feel free, so we are live on YouTube, and there are, I think, a few people watching on YouTube, and we will gather comments and questions. So this webinar is only successful if you join in and if you interact. So we would really, really welcome your, as you hear from our panelists, so feel free to use the Q&A box in the Zoom. So those of you who are in Zoom, please use the Q&A box to ask questions, write your clarification questions, but also it's not just about what our panelists present. So feel free to comment, to write your own kind of comments about this broader topic of local experimentation, your experiences of maybe doing local transition experimentation in the context of the current crisis. So we would also like to listen to you. After we listen to our panelists, we will have time to actually engage with in a broader discussion with all of you. So that's the kind of general instruction. So feel free to use the Q&A box, the chat box, and those who are watching in YouTube, please also comment on the YouTube comment box, and we will collect all the questions from both YouTube and Zoom. So with that introduction, Rafael, am I missing something, or I think we can go straight into our first presenter?
No, I think we can go straight. Thank you, Bipashi.
Okay. So our first presenter will be Dr. Wilhelmina Kwe. She is the director of CSIR in Ghana. She's the team leader for the transformative innovation policy in the EWaste in Ghana. She's also an African woman in agricultural research and development fellow, and she's a monitoring and evaluation specialist for Sustainable Development and Relief Associates, SUDRA. So I would warmly welcome Wilhelmina as our first panelist for today's webinar. Wilhelmina, floor is yours. You can share your screen.
Thank you. Okay, so can you hear me? Yeah, good morning to you all. It's a bright, actually we've gone into afternoon here in Ghana. The topic is on the EWaste management system in Ghana through the transformative innovation policy lens, the relevance in the wake of COVID. By way of introduction, yeah, I would like us to look at what the issue is. EWaste for us in Ghana here is on the increase as a result of increasing population growth, increasing use of electronic gadgets. That comes with people having to have a lot of money on their hands and also having to want to move a bit up in the standard of living, and so would want to own gadgets. We've also realized that us being in Africa has been a dumping ground for almost expired products, and about 50% of electronic devices imports are considered EWaste on arrival, and which is of course in violation of the Basel Convention on Transboundary Movement of Hazardous Waste. According to the United Nations, about 20 to 50 million metric tons of EWaste are discarded every year, while 41.8 million metric tons of electronic waste shipped to developing countries for recycling. And this was recorded in 2014. It is estimated that about 38,000 tons of EWaste have been imported in 2014 or generated, most of it being imports as well. The existing practice of recycling and disposing of EWaste is largely, for us in Ghana, informal. And we have about 95% of EWaste being collected in the informal sector by EWaste collectors. And the process has serious environmental and health impacts. Disposal of toxic waste components such as mercury, lead, and cadmium into our water bodies and our soils, of course, should be a source of concern to all of us. You can see that we have the composition of EWaste in Ghana using the 2010 to 2016 estimates. In terms of proportion, we have about 88% coming from the ICT equipment and 10% from large household appliances, including old refrigerators. A little bit of 2% from consumer electronics. For small household appliances, it is very negligible. So that is the composition for you. Here we have EWaste management with the transformative innovation policy lens. And here we actually look at some key concept when you are using the transformative innovation policy lenses. So you look at, the question is, why did we choose EWaste, for example, EWaste management and not any other? We looked at the impact in terms of the scale of impact and the system impact. It is transboundary problem. And so a lot of countries are involved in this. And so the impact is not just national, it's also regional and international. Again, as I mentioned, there are lots of actors involved in the EWaste system. So you could, for example, talk about the collectors, those involved at the collection centers, the transporters, the treatment facility points, who are those involved there, and the final disposal. And of course, with the TIPSI lens, or the transformative innovation policy lens, we also looked at what is the societal challenge here. And so, of course, it is a societal challenge. It has environmental impact, not just environmental impact, but also social. You can look at waste as a resource, and so you can make some money out of it. And so we have a lot of people who find themselves working in there to survive, so a form of livelihood. We have some women also engage in, cooking and other activities at the recycling site, or where the collectors actually would want to first mantle and also take away what they see as a resource from the waste. For us, it also gave us a learning opportunity, because with a TIPSI lens, we could also look at the technical guidelines on environmental sound e-waste management, which currently Ghana has, and also offered us the opportunity to make an input. So here on the screen, you could see the different kinds of activities that we carried out under the TIPSI project, or Transformation Innovation Policy Lens project. First of all, we look at the science, technology, and innovation policies over the years, and we did some kind of mapping, trying to make sure that we tease out the salient points in terms of what are the transformative elements in all the STI policies, or science, technology, innovation policies, that have been developed as a country for us to use as a framework for integrating science, technology, and development in our developmental planning process. In the course of that project activities, we also held, we were lucky to participate in an inside workshop in South Africa, where we also, coming out of that process, produced a research insight, or a brief on a blog, to also add to the lessons that we have learned in the whole broad transformative innovation movement, because it's not just here in Ghana. Ghana was part of a pilot program. So it was Ghana, Senegal, and Kenya. But then
Wilhelmina, you have to unmute. Somehow your microphone is muted.
it's muted.
Now it's good. You can reshare your screen again.
Okay, are we good to go?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Should I start over, or I can continue?
No, you can continue. I think we missed the last sentence or so.
Okay.
Let's repeat the last sentence.
So we also, as I mentioned, the EWaste was a case study for us in Ghana. So we had focus group discussions with all the actors in the EWaste value chain, using the transformative innovation learning history methodology. And again, I must say that we have a link to the report on that exercise. But basically, I will explain further what we did with the transformative innovation learning history. And also we participated in an inside workshop in Senegal, also trying to share the experiences. And lastly, we have developed and submitted a journal publication on our experiences with the transformative innovation learning history. So you see on the screen, the National Integrated E-Waste Management Scheme, kind of visualizing what plan we have for Ghana in terms of the e-waste management. And you could see the city sign all over the chain, because waste is seen as a resource. And here we have starting from the producer end, where we've got to collect the e-waste from the producers, from people who are using these kinds of materials, in addition to the imports that are coming in. And so we have collectors, we have electronic repair shops also looking at what they can get out of the waste. The collection center we visualize an environmentally sound dismantling of e-waste system, so we could get the valuables out of the e-waste. It's being transported to a national holding center where we would have the opportunity of actually adding value to the e-waste. And at the extreme end, we are looking at a recycling plant that will recycle this e-waste, and then we'll take the valuables back into the export chain. So this is a visualization, and you could see that we also have this eco fund where we could tax the companies that are bringing in these materials, and to be able to get some kind of money to be able to reintegrate and take out the valuables from the e-waste in a more environmentally friendly manner.
Lemina, maybe you have 5-6 minutes.
So in the course of the methodology that we use, we try to come out with the very key events since the year 2000 up until now. What are the key events that are taking place in the e-waste management system? And so we had to file up the key events and learn the key lessons from it as part of the process. This is just giving you the indications of the transformative element. We have to be focused. We have to look at the societal goals, the system impact that I've already talked about. What are the conflicts and how do we manage it? And how do we make the whole process very inclusive? Now, the e-waste, we also look at e-waste and the contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals. And here you realize that we are, in the course of the work, we could see that we are making contributions to a lot of the Sustainable Development Goals 6, 8, 12, 11, 3, and 14. Yeah, so the key issue here is that we've got to formalize the informal. As I mentioned earlier on, the e-waste system is largely controlled by the informal sector. And so these are workshops, capacity building programs, and you could see the amount of money that is being generated from that sector. And as I mentioned, it's a source of livelihood option for a lot of people. We have here 2,000 people across the country. This was work done in 2014. Highlight from the e-waste socio-technical system. Doing business as usual as projects will not help us. And so in the course of the work, we realized that there ought to be a lot of questioning about proper coordination, outcomes, and impact. We also have to involve all the relevant stakeholders in decision-making, looking at it, encouraging bottom-up approaches. The regulations and enforcement will not just be regulations, but then it has to be backed with a lot of education and awareness creation. Why people should not do the old way of doing things, but then come into the light of using improved technologies to improve the e-waste management. People are afraid of formalizing the informal, fear of jobs. We need to manage that, especially with the SMEs involved. As also coming out with innovative business models to make sure that it could attract the kind of infrastructure input that we need to create green jobs in the e-waste management system. And of course, the extended producer responsibility and attraction of carbon footprint in carbon financing we said that it should be vigorously pursued. In the wake of COVID, we have learned that we need to look inward, build local capacities, and also not just Ghana, but also look over other countries, especially those of us in the sub-region, and to make sure that we come out with innovative solutions and build the capacities across all sectors. We have to minimize the potential negative impact on environment through recycling, creating eco-friendly products and other sustainable strategies. And health risks, we have learned from the COVID that health risks actually impact on all other sectors. And so we have to look at it more from a circular economy perspective. These are the references that you can find innovation, productive, transformative innovation, policy applications in, which we also made references to in the course of our work. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Wilhelmina. That was really, really interesting to hear about your work and also to learn more about the different initiatives that you have taken over the last few years for this e-waste management issue, which is really an important issue. Rafael, do we have any questions, either from YouTube or do you have a question?
Well, we don't have any questions, Bipashi, in the Q&A box, either on YouTube. If anyone has any clarification, we have some time for that. But I would like to ask Dr. Quay if she can point out some initiatives to formalize the e-waste collectors or separators works in Ghana. How is the local government trying to formalize? Is there any initiative or some kind of legal framework that's being elaborated to that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. As I presented in the present a few minutes ago, we actually have a lot of programs and projects, but the key one is being sponsored by GIZ, helping the Environment Ministry to come up with an intervention that is looking at a whole environmentally friendly way of managing the e-waste. And here you realize that there are lots of programs to educate and bring into focus the fact that we need, in terms of education, not just forcing it on people's throats, that we need to formalize the informal. Because without that, we cannot imbibe into the system the eco-friendly strategies of handling e-waste. So this is the way the whole ministry is going about. So it's going to be a national program where we have a national recycling center and also all the informal actors involved being educated and sensitized on the need to collect the e-waste in a environmentally friendly manner and to bring it to a point where they could be incentivized to bring it to the center where a proper recycling facility is being put up. Thank you.
Thank you. I was also wondering about the impact of COVID, particularly in these initiatives. So, you know, you have been doing a lot of these workshops and learning events and engagement events. So could you maybe think about, talk a bit about, you know, your future plans or how this project is going to be impacted, or how this so what are the kind of different adaptations that you had to do because of the, you know, current situation, and how do you see the sustainability, you know, how are these initiatives going to sustain, and whether the current crisis has impacted the learning, because you have been talking about, you know, so first of all, the idea of circular economy. So how do you how do you move to a circular economy? So what are the kind of different concrete steps that you have been thinking, and how that is impacted by the current crisis?
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier on, the current crisis has taught us to be inward looking for the improved technologies, being very innovative about the way we conduct our e-waste collection. Before, we were always looking outward for experts to come and tell us what to do. But with the current situation, it's more of virtual engagement and also making use of the local experts. And as I mentioned, with this current situation of the COVID, a lot of engagement is now being done virtual. But the point is that we have a large proportion of informal SMEs involved. But it is great to know that by and large, people are buying into the idea of using their mobile phones and also listening in to a lot of education on radio. So the in-face engagement is just going to be reduced. But of course, we make use of the apps and other kinds of engagement to make sure that we still stay awake. And also, I would add that for us as researchers, our engagement were more to do with the policymakers. And again, we use the virtual platforms to do this. And then in moving forward with the transformative innovating policy, what the transformative innovation policy lens does in the times of COVID is, what are the new ways of doing this? What is new and what can you use in the process? Okay, so as I mentioned, it's not business as usual. We continuously have to interrogate the process. So currently for us in step 3, with the transformation innovation policies engagement, we are reflecting and coming up with briefs and also with our publications. And not just that, but also moving forward with the capacity that we have built in the course of the project to come up with excerpts that can be used as tools to engage with our policymakers. So this is what we are doing currently.
I think you partly also answered a question that we have in the Q&A box from Imogen. And I have also allowed Imogen to talk. So Imogen, do you want to ask your question? Just so Dr. K has something to add. Imogen? Yeah.
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think Wilhelmina kind of answered it already, but my question was, I guess, to what extent does she think that these the changes brought about by the transformative innovation policy approach will last? How sort of sustainable will they be in terms of managing e-waste in Ghana? Thank you.
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier on, the transformative innovation policy approach is not a static concept, because the approach is key on innovative ways. So we have COVID. The question is that COVID has taught us that issues to do with health need to be taken seriously because it affects every economy. Now, we have a lot of projects in the waste management system, and to be specific, the e-waste, and as I mentioned, we have a whole project being sponsored by GIZ on looking at environmentally friendly way of managing our e-waste. Because e-waste, you realize that most of the electronics were being imported from the EU. So that's how come GIZ was much interested in funding this environmentally sustainable project. And the idea is to come up with a policy on e-waste management. And that sets the framework for all of us in the e-waste management ecosystem to be guided and to comply to the policy framework. And again, I must say that with the pandemic, we ought to look more inwardly, to use inward capacity more in terms of training experts. First, you look inward to find out which expert is available before you consider looking elsewhere. Again, you consider which innovative ways can we use to sensitize and bring the awareness and educate our people on the menace of and the consequences of e-waste. Again, I mentioned the circular economy bit because the innovative transformation policy would ask key questions to do with the system skill, to do with not just the technical, but also the socio-technical, meaning that what are the livelihood issues? And I mentioned people are scared of losing their jobs because be it small, that is what they have to take out, go move from house to house and take, e-waste and look out of what are the valuables that they can get out of it. And in the process of doing that, they burn to be able to extract what they look at as valuable, to be able to sell and also get money. And so all these different aspects of the system is what the TRIP approach would want to interrogate and make sure that we address the issues from the bottom-up approach, making sure that all the stakeholders are concerned, all the stakeholders are taking part in the decision-making process.
Thank you. Thank you. That was really, really nice overview. Thank you. I really appreciate your input in this, and I would like to thank you for your presentation and your answers. I think if in the interest of time, we should go to our next panelist, who is Versolo Sunio. So he is he worked at the Department of Transportation in Philippines. He was involved in many programs to accelerate public transport reform in the Philippines. He has a PhD from Kyoto University, specializing on sustainable mobility. And his current research also focuses on public transport reform and transitions in the global South, I guess, South Asian context. So I would like to give a warm welcome to Dr. Versolo Sunio, and the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, hello, good evening, everyone. So I'm Vars. I'm based in Manila, and well, it's 8 p.m. now. So good evening. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about this topic on COVID-19 as an opportunity or setback for transition in transport. And I'm hoping that at the end of the presentation, there is some interest in trying to explore more what's happening in Metro Manila. So my presentation consists of only two parts. So the first part, I'll talk about the developments and innovations in transport systems in Metro Manila, and I'll consider only three. So the bus, the jeepney, and then cycling. And then the second part, which is much shorter, I'll speak about how to ensure a better normal. So for the first part, innovations in transport systems in Manila. Yeah, probably, I don't know how many of you have been to Metro Manila, but yeah, this is perhaps yeah, a city where you can find one of the worst congestions in the world. So that explains why we're hoping that yeah, we can somehow reform the public transport in our city. So just to give you a context, so Metro Manila is the capital of the Philippines. and we are located in Southeast Asia. Now, to give a background about the timeline of transport suspension and resumption in Metro Manila. So on March 16, that's when the government decided to put the whole of Metro Manila, and in fact, I think the whole of Philippines, on a total lockdown. So that was on March 16. And then for about 2 months, public transport was suspended. And on June 1, that's when the government eased the restrictions. So first, it allowed the trains and railways to operate at a reduced capacity. At the same time, the buses in the megacity were also allowed to operate, but only on selected routes. So I'm going to talk about what I mean by rationalized routes here, but this is one of the probably most exciting developments that happened in Metro Manila during the pandemic. And then June 22, because the government is following a hierarchy of transportation, so it first allowed the operation of higher capacity vehicles, and then on June 22, it allowed the operation of modern jeepneys. So I'll show you pictures later on of modern jeepneys, but these are basically minibuses. And then only on July 3 did it allow the operation of traditional jeepneys, which are considered roadworthy. And and then another development was on August 7. That's when one of the bills in Congress on service contracting was filed. This is one of the policies that some advocacy coalitions is lobbying, service contracting, because the current system in Metro Manila is that the public transport services were provided by private operators. And then August 19, that's when Department Joint Administrative Order on Active Transport was released by a number of government agencies. So this is a joint administrative order. So it was released not only by the Department of Transport, but also with the Department of Health, Interior Government, and also the Public Works. So this is a happy development last August 19th. So that's the background. And another information, so the transport mode share in Metro Manila. So cars and motorcycle only accounted for about 33% of the total passenger trips in Metro Manila. So most passenger trips are made by public transport, especially road-based public transport. So that is the reason why for this presentation, we are focusing on road-based public transport, because this would account for a lot of passenger trips in the city. Now, to give so this is a conceptual framework that we developed. So probably to try to follow the brief presentation, I would like you to just focus on this framework. So I'm going to talk about the three systems, transport systems, so cycling, bus, and then jeep. And then we divide the temporal period into three. So the old normal, that means before the lockdown. And before the lockdown, so the government already implemented a number of innovations, but these innovations did not really expand or got implemented at the pace that the government desired. So it remained only at the peripheries because of the resistance from the incumbent regime. But during the pandemic, there were a lot of course, struggles, tensions, discourses, and negotiations. But so some developments were accelerated, and that's what I'm going to present later on. And other developments were also disrupted or hindered. And I'm going to show you some enabling mechanisms on how we can probably make these gains in the during the pandemic permanent in the new normal. Now, so first, the bus system in Metro Manila. So the incumbent bus system is characterized by, many buses, they have overlapping routes. So there is no rationalization of routes in Metro Manila. So you have roads that are used by more buses, while you also have routes that are underserved. So for example, this route in Metro Manila, you don't really find a lot, well, you don't find buses here, but this is a major thoroughfare. And also the system is very chaotic. Okay. Now in 2014, that's when the DOTR, the Department of Transportation, with the support from the World Bank, did a study on how to rationalize the road transit in Metro Manila. And then the conclusion of the study was to only have 16 mass transit in the whole metropolis. So instead of many overlapping routes, the suggestion or the recommendation of the study was only to have 16 mass transit corridors, and the rest are secondary routes. And also there was an attempt in Metro Manila to implement a BRT. So this was approved as early as 2014, but then it never got implemented. So that's what happened in the old normal. There were studies, and in fact, there were also attempts to reform the bus sector, but but 2019, there was really not much progress. So that is the reason why the pandemic proved to be providential in the sense that it gave the government an opportunity to trigger a massive public transport modernization. So many commentators would call the pandemic, the bus reform in Metro Manila as the silver lining of the pandemic. Now, so what are some of the experiments or innovations that were implemented during the pandemic? So instead of having 16 mass transit routes for buses, so they so the government implemented 31 rationalized city bus routes. So this was started in June 1. So that's when the bus services resumed. But instead of going back to the old normal, the government decided to implement the rationalization of bus routes. So this is the new system. We have 31 routes here, color coded. So that's why we're happy about this. And then instead of buses stopping anywhere, so that's the old system in Metro Manila, the buses can stop anywhere. We have designated stops. Okay, here. And then also, and priority or exclusive lanes. Well, this is priority, but some people were happy about this. And at the same time, in Metro Manila, the payment mode, it's cash-based, but last October 1, they implemented this cashless fare collection. Okay, and then hopefully in the new normal, we would be able to implement really a real network of BRTs. Okay. So that's the bus system. Now we go to the next one, which is the innovation and the Jeepney system. I don't know if you guys know or have seen a Jeepney, but basically it's a minibus. So this is the traditional Jeepney you can see here. Okay. Now in the old normal, so the jeepneys would account for about 200,000 jeepney units nationwide. And there have been a lot of attempts in the past, as early as 2000, to phase out the old jeepneys or to reform the jeepney sector. But again, they were failed attempts. Now in 2017, that's when the government launched this very ambitious modernization program, the Public Utility Vehicle Modernization Program. Well, it covers all the road-based transport modes, but then when it was initially implemented, the focus was on jeepneys. So this is how the modern jeepneys look like. Okay, and then we have some papers here about the PUVMP if you want to know more details. Now, so that was implemented in 2017, June 2017. Now, as of October 2019, the PUV modernization was 97% behind the target. So in other words, only 2% or 3% of the vehicle units were modernized. So that's how slow the implementation was. Now, when the pandemic happened, well, this is the opinion of a former top-ranking official in the government. Well, he's not anymore in the government, but he was the undersecretary, the vice minister who implemented this project. So he was saying that the pandemic would probably spell the end of the jeepneys because they are not really the proper mode of transport in the new normal. So there were in fact measures to hasten the modernization during the pandemic. So the first one is, as I mentioned earlier, when the public transport was resumed, the jeepney was at the bottom of the hierarchy. So it was first buses and then trains, then modern jeepneys, but at the end, it's a traditional jeepney. And at the same time, the government doubled the subsidy offered to the traditional jeepney operators. Yes, so this is what I meant by gradual phased resumption of public transport. So you have the bus first at the top of the hierarchy, and then you have the jeepney at the bottom. And then at the same time, they were banned initially, but later on, they were allowed. Okay, and then the subsidy was also doubled, in an attempt to try to attract more traditional jeepney operators to modernize. Okay, so now this is the question. I mean, many were hoping that probably the pandemic would prove to be beneficial in accelerating the modernization, but because of, at the same time, there were opinions that because of the pandemic, it really impeded the pace of the project. Yeah, because of issues on social justice. Okay, so that's why a lot of transport groups were calling for just transition in the PUV modernization program. Okay, and then finally, so the innovation in the cycling system. Now in Metro Manila, prior to the pandemic, we can probably say that the bicycle has never been mainstreamed nor encouraged in the country's public transport system. So it never was a viable mode of commuting in Metro Manila. Now, during the pandemic, when the lockdown, when Metro Manila was put on total lockdown, so we saw a lot of uptake of cycling, of course, among the medical frontliners. And in fact, there were also a number of individuals trying to raise funds to purchase bikes for the frontliners. And at the same time, there were ordinary citizens themselves. They started cycling in Metro Manila. So you would see a lot of bikes parked here. And then we also saw a number of civil society groups doing some cycling demonstrations along major thoroughfares in Metro Manila, and then putting these markers to help the cyclists, to protect the cyclists from passing vehicles. So there was a lot of activism that we saw, and then new infrastructures by the government. So networks of cycling lanes were put up in the city, and then also even the largest mall chain in Metro Manila or in the Philippines, they also put up parking facilities, etc. So we saw a lot of these developments, and then probably the landmark is this policy. So why is this the landmark? Because this was issued not only by a single government agency, but by the Department of Health, Department of Transport, Department of Public Works and Highways, and then the Public of Transportation. So this is a joint administrative order issued by the 4 government agencies to promote active transport during and after the COVID pandemic. Now,
You have 5 minutes?
Yeah, I'm ending now. Yeah, thank you. So now this is the last part. So these are the gains in the old normal, during the time of the pandemic. So the question is how to make these gains permanent. And here I borrow ideas from this Move as One coalition. It's the largest coalition of Filipino individuals advocating for more inclusive public transport. And well, I've written an article, well, not related to the Move as One, but about some civil society organizations in Metro Manila, which are members of this coalition. So the recommendations are to implement service contracting, create a network of protected bike lanes, and then improve the efficiency of public transport. And now their advocacy is we can only make this gains permanent if the Department of Transport includes, this as part of the national budget. So right now there is a budget deliberation happening in the Congress, and this is the battle now to put it as part of the budget. Yeah, if you see here, this is the budget of the government for each of the items. It's almost zero, but this is what we need. So this is what they're lobbying right now. Okay, so yeah, you can find more information about this coalition in their Facebook page. But the main idea is, to make this permanent, this gains permanent. I think it's best that the government really puts money into these programs. Okay, so that's it. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Vars. That was really fascinating. At least to me, I mean, I'm really fascinated with this kind of mobility experimentation. So you really did a very nice. That was really a very nice overview of all the different changes that are happening in urban mobility, passenger transport. That's really fascinating personally to me. Thank you. I think we have a
thank you.
question. We have a question from Joanna. Let me try to give her access to her microphone so that she can talk. Joanna, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yeah. Hello.
Hello, yes.
Hello.
Hi, Dr. Fars. Hi, Fars.
Yeah,
Very
hello.
nice to hear your presentations.
Thank you.
So that I think there are many insights and also very detailed informations to the context of the Metro Manila. So thank you again for presenting the transportation in Metro Manila. And I have 2 questions actually in regards to the situation in the Metro Manila. The first one, I was interested when you tell us the story about the Jeepney. When the government introduced the modernized Jeepney, I was wondering what happens to the old Jeepney actors. And then the second question is, do you think cycling will be the future mode of transportation in Metro Manila after Corona crisis? So that's all.
Okay, thank you. So the Jeepney modernization program. So this was this is the flagship program of the current administration that was implemented in 2017. So when it was in 2017, so there were a number of jeepney operators who supported the program, but there were also a number of transport associations who opposed the program. So it's a highly contested issue because the jeepney would account for a large percentage of employment. So they would fear that if we modernize, so there will be a lot of displaced jobs. And then at the same time, the argument is they cannot afford to modernize because the units are for them very expensive. So that's why in October 2019, so that was 2 years after the launch of the program, the program, the status of the program was 97% behind the target. So it was a very slow process because of a lot of opposition. Okay, so right now you can still find a lot of traditional jeepneys in Metro Manila. So yeah, and then to the second question, yeah, if cycling would be the future of Metro Manila. Well, for one, in my case, I started cycling, when the pandemic happened. So I bought a bicycle, cycled around, and somehow it disproved the notion that Metro Manila is not cyclable. But if it is the future, yeah, that's actually the battle right now. There are a lot of gains during the crisis, the pandemic. You would see a lot of people cycling. You find infrastructure, cycling infrastructures put up. But then I think the issue here is that they are not really network cycling lanes. So that's why this advocacy coalition, Move as One, they wanted the government to put it in their budget. Yeah, to put up really an honest to goodness, serious network of cycling facilities. So yeah, we don't really know, but that's why this time it's I think it's decisive.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. We also have a question from Diego. Diego, are you able to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, Dr. Versolo. I wish to add another question of the question of Susie. If you think that the BRT system is a good system for Metro Manila, I think about this because I live in Bogota, Colombia. The BRT system is not a good system here in the city. Metro Manila is a bigger city than Bogota. I know that the socio-technical transition don't think about is good or bad, but I wish to know about you. Do you think of if they a good system for Metro Manila?
Yeah, actually the BRT system with the funding from the World Bank, it was first proposed in the previous administration and it was already approved. But then the current administration, shelved some of the projects. So there are supposed to be 3 BRT projects in the Philippines, 2 in Metro Manila, and then 1 in Cebu. And there are feasibility studies on this. So now to your question, if I am personally in favor, yeah, I am in favor of the BRT system in Metro Manila.
Okay, don't
but
worry.
If it is a good system or not, yeah, technically there are a lot of debates. But my personal preference is to put up a BRT in Metro Manila. Yeah.
I know. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is also a very interesting debate, and I would also encourage many of you, if you have research or if you have interest in this. So we know there's a lot of ongoing debate around directionality. So we have transitions, we have ongoing transitions, but yeah, whether it's good or bad, it's a really important question. Thank you, Diego, for mentioning that, and also specifically on BRT system, how appropriate is it in different cities? Yes, that's also a very, very relevant question. We have, so maybe we'll take a final last question for Dr. Sunyo from Imogen again. I will allow Imogen to talk. So Imogen has a very important question. So maybe Imogen, you can ask the question.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Versolo, for your interesting presentation. I guess so. My question is, I mean, you mentioned that civil society movements were really drove at least the cycling system innovation in Metro Manila. Did they play a role in driving the other 2 transport innovation systems, the changes in the jeepney system and bus system? And what was there a role of international movements or organizations or experiences and were there policymakers who supported these changes, as well as civil society movements?
Yeah,
I hope that makes
yeah.
sense. So,
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, for this question. So I think well, the civil society movements, of course, they would make pronouncements on the bus and then jeepney reform, but during the time of the pandemic, many of their initiatives were really on cycling. Yeah, that's one. And then second, were they inspired by international movements? Well, I think it's really homegrown. They really originated from Metro Manila, and they would represent a broad sector of society. So you have like professionals, commuters, and then members of international organizations as well who are sympathetic to the cause. Yeah. So the one that I wrote a paper on that was published in case study on transport policy. So it only focused on one organization. But what I presented today, which is the Move as One coalition, is actually a coalition of about 100 organizations. So it's and many of these organizations are actually based in the Philippines. And part of their advocacy is actually to talk to government policymakers, because as I mentioned, their battle right now is to put the budget in our national budget some funds for different programs, especially cycling. So in order to do that, they need to influence the policymakers.
Yes, thanks, Parth. I
Okay.
think that
Thank you.
was really good. I think let's continue the discussion. We will have time after our next presentation and question answer. We will have time for continuing the debate. So I will move on to the next, our final kind of speakers, group of speakers. But before that, let me also start a poll just to understand where those of you who are joining our webinar today, where are you joining from? So let me just start the poll so you can answer the poll while I introduce our third group of speakers. So we have a very interesting presentation now done by not one speaker, but multiple speakers. Let's see, I need to access my, yeah, so let me say warm welcome to Dr. Maria Lima Toivonen. She is a senior scientist at VTT Technical Research Center of Finland, and her work has focused mostly on Latin America and the Caribbean, also African and Southeast Asian context. Along with her, we will have Pedro Figueroa, who is an expert on science diplomacy. He is also co-founder and the president of Diplo Scientifica. He has a bachelor's in political science and management from Chile and a master's in international relations from Belgium. So welcome also Pedro. And together with Maria and Pedro, we also have Venkata Gandikota. He is the co-founder of InnoFrugal. He's involved in developing impact investment ecosystem in Finland. And he has a bachelor's in chemical engineering from India and then master's in environmental engineering from the USA. So I warmly welcome all of you, Maria, Pedro, and Venkata, for agreeing to present in our webinar. So the floor is yours. And I'll also stop the poll. Thank you for answering.
Thank you, Bipashi. Welcome everybody to this presentation, and thank you for participating. I will conduct the presentation, and then later on my colleagues Pedro and Venkata will also have a space. We got interested in the solutions that have been, let's say, fastly deployed to tackle COVID by means of frugal innovations. And therefore, we started investigating some cases that we are going to present to you today. This is basically the structure of our talk. And the research context and the connection it has with the topic of the webinar series that's taking place today is it talks about local innovations that have been deployed in the context of emerging countries or have been developed to be deployed in this context. And just a quick look at some of the impacts of COVID-19 in healthcare. This is definitely not, it's far from exhaustive, and it's just taking one aspect of it, of the development of or deployment of technologies. We are quite well aware of a lot of other developments in the field of vaccines, with a lot of innovation in that field as well. And but our focus is mostly on health technologies and some aspects of it. Altogether, there have been a big burden on healthcare system due to lack of knowledge and the novelty of the disease, equipment, personnel, protective equipment, and medication, and so on and so on. That generated quite a big race for innovations, both for prevention and treatment of the disease. And we had seen that especially emerging and developing countries, they were more impacted for lack of access to solutions, whereas developed countries, they started an earlier race for equipment and all that solutions that were needed to treat COVID-19. Therefore, the countries, especially emerging and developing countries, were lagging behind and suffered mostly for lack of access. And altogether, even other companies that were not in the healthcare or health technologies field have been engaged in production of essential items. For example, ventilators, sanitizers, beverage companies have been producing sanitizers, car makers been producing parts for ventilators and other equipment, just some examples. And we also in this regard, both for production of vaccines and equipment, there has been an institutional void. It's a lack of proper regulations to allow for the quick deployment of solutions to treat COVID. And in this space, a lot of frugal innovations, you will see some of them later on, have been developed. And then we see this is just a picture from yesterday of the number of cases and deaths. And unfortunately, in the growing, the numbers, especially now in Europe, we are seeing growth and numbers, and Latin America have been the region with most cases. So to show just one example of this impact, we are focusing here on ventilators, and it's also 3 of the cases that we are going to present to you are related to them. This is like a machine that allows for mechanic support, artificial support to respiration when the lungs cannot do it. And just an example of the impact of the cost of ventilation for treatment of respiratory diseases. We consulted a paper of 2017 that put them in about 19% on average of the daily cost an average increase of 90% of daily cost of intensive care unity. Due to the pandemic, there has been a forecast of a growth of 172% of demand for ventilators, and this evolving from 80,000 unities that have been produced before the pandemic. The fear of not having enough ventilators to treat a population due to about 2.5% of people who are diagnosed with COVID will need intensive care and mechanical ventilation. A race, let's say, has been established with developed countries, for example, acquiring more ventilators than they needed. One example is the UK, because after social distancing and was more observed, less people than foreseen got the disease, and therefore those ventilators are on standby, let's say, in UK. But anyway, developed countries have been more advanced in acquiring not only ventilators, but other equipments for treating COVID. And this is just to show that to cope with the lack of ventilators or potential lack of ventilators, also other agents like car makers start producing parts. But then we see the burden on developing countries. Just to cite two examples, like Ecuador in Latin America had only 110 ventilators for 20 million inhabitants. And in African countries, there are some that have none. So in the context of Latin America, which we have, or to be deployed in Latin America, the 3 cases of ventilators you look at, they were produced by means of frugal innovations. So, and then we will take a look at what are frugal innovations, specifically in healthcare, and which ones have been deployed for COVID-19. I will not go through this. There's a reference to it, but basically the frugal innovations involves how to produce a more affordable solution for the most amount of people, and often in collaborative means, and especially to be deployed or developed in the face of resource constraint and institutional voids. We are calling here resource constraint related to poverty, remoteness of regions, shortage of provider of access, and different ones. And these institutional voids are related to role of institutions, and can be, for example, regulations, lack of power of people to participate and to make their voices heard and their needs attended properly, and so on. And the discussion about frugal innovations, they started first driven by businesses with the discourse of base of the pyramid, and especially Western companies working to solve those, and then has evolved to be related to sustainability and also challenge-driven innovations like the ones that we are seeing in the case of this emergency situation. Then going through some criteria to identify frugal innovation that we applied in the cases. They are related to affordability, adaptability, accessibility, and scalability of the solutions. And witnessing some innovations, frugal innovations in healthcare, often they are implemented in order to provide more access or expand access of people to solutions in a safe condition, considering the circumstances and the constraints of the environment. Often they are deployed or developed by partnerships between government, academic, industry, donors, and NGOs. Still, challenges for implementation are related to regulatory approval, selection, procurement, and all the development path from conception of the idea to disposal. And especially in the case of COVID-19, we have seen that these frugal innovations have been related to repurposing of existing solutions, reusing existing solutions, or rapid deployment, especially by using open source and 3D printing to producing solutions quickly. And some examples of frugal innovations in healthcare, like they go from high tech to homegrown, meaning high tech, especially those solutions that have been developed by companies, and especially Western companies, that are then stripped out of, let's say, extraordinary features and focus only on essential ones to be deployed in the context of constraints, as especially are the ones related to emerging and developing countries. Until like the homegrown, that are innovations that are often very simple and developed by people themselves. So for the frugal innovations to tackle COVID, we have identified many, and there are important references for these cases. We focus here especially on those, let's say, higher end solutions, like the ventilators, diagnostic tests, but they go from like this do it yourself that's also related to frugal innovations, like especially these home grounds like the masks, to more advanced like the ventilators. So our case studies, we made basically very exploratory study looking at news in the intranet, and then selecting some of those cases for interview with the people who had been involved in the development. We have interviewed cases from Brazil, Chile, and the Netherlands. And unfortunately, our attempts to reach people in Africa, South Africa, and Uganda, and then in India, they have not been proven successful. We have no returns. Therefore, if any of you have any contacts of people who have been developing frugal innovations for COVID, please share with us. So the first case is a platform for records of COVID cases developed by Brazilian Nucleus of Health Technology of State University of Paraíba. And its aim was to fill in a gap of electronic health records in general, and especially for follow-up of COVID cases. And it allowed also for remote consultations by infectologists to frontline doctors in public and private hospitals of the location. And the funding came for reallocation of project personnel that could not go to field research and had to be in the laboratory and then also government grant. The needs they attended, yes, the electronic health record platform, lack of in-hospital experts in pulmonary and infectious diseases, and also some of the experts were in the risk group, and then they could then follow up the patients and give consultancy to the doctors remotely. And also lack of clear treatment protocols that, especially in the very early stages of the virus, have been quite important. So the features like being produced open source, and like the cases were followed up from identification of cases to discharge. And also one important feature is that the data they are generating, they aim at deploying artificial intelligence, and then provide means of refining the protocols for treatment, for example. And the mechanical ventilators, like the context where they have been developed, this scarcity due to the emergency situation, also time pressure. They have to be developed quickly. High cost of commercially available ventilators, and at the same time, high cost and low and long delivery time for imported parts, and lack of local suppliers. And 2 of the 3 initiatives that we have investigated, they were bottom-up, meaning that they were developed by experts in their own countries. So the 3 projects were Inspiration, Inspire, and VMers. Inspiration and Inspire quite related to the briefing exercise, and VMers stands for mechanical ventilator for rapid deployment. Like some,
Maria,
yes.
so maybe you have 5 to 7 minutes. So
yes.
Yeah.
So we analyzed the features regarding like how they have been developed and adapted to like be used and provide good enough support for mechanical ventilation, the affordability related to the costs, the partnerships that have been utilized to deploy, and especially in the case of the Brazilian ventilator, that like the Navy has been the entity that has been producing the ventilators because of their expertise in with sensitive technologies. It was easier to validate and accredit the ventilator with the National Health Surveillance Agency. And the same challenge was also seen in Chile. What happened that the different professional organizations then filled in the void to accredit the ventilator developed there. And is the same also been the challenge in Netherlands, but this was mostly the replication of old ventilator from the 60s that would be produced locally in developing countries. They have already discussed with Mexico and Guatemala, for example. And now this, by being developed as open source, and so the scalability is much easier to be done. And in our discussion, we would like to bring just some of aspects that these innovations they have happened, especially in the context of the scarcity or fear of those solutions. They are often simpler versions in the case of the ventilators, of the commercialized ones adapted to the local context with local and cheaper suppliers. In the case of Brazil, the Chile steel, they had to import parts and open source software. Also an example how to tackle a void for rapid deployment of health technologies we have witnessed. And creation of new knowledge on frugal innovations for emergency situations, boosting of especially technical knowledge that was inexisting in terms of ventilator development and production. And new patterns of knowledge dissemination. This is in general for these more high-tech frugal innovations, because especially the share of designs and codes and so on that has taken place. And our conclusions, we think this frugal innovations wave that COVID-19 generated, they can also be stimulate models for tackling other diseases and diminish burden on healthcare system, and especially in the context of emerging and developing countries. Also, they can be, the model of development solutions can be also utilized for tackling other societal challenges, seeing, for example, the role of technology and information and communication technologies, fast knowledge dissemination, rapid deployment, fast track approvals by different regulatory agencies. For conceptual development, like there is contribution in terms of emergency or challenge-led frugal innovations, role of quadruple helix, especially emphasizing the participation of academia for development of frugal innovations. And it was the case of all of the ones we investigated. Role of this innovation ecosystem to produce frugal innovations, how different levels of organizations have been involved, including companies. Overcoming of voids, and the special limitation that we have witnessed is, and affect especially the generalization of the results, are that these are, we investigate few experiences, and they are most in early stages of development, and that affect the generalization of results. And we'd like very much to thank you, and our contact in case you wish to reach us. And still we may have 1-2 minutes if Pedro and Venkata would like to add something that I might have missed.
Sure, yeah, go ahead, Venkata or Pedro.
Hi, this is Venkata. So I think pretty much broadly, I think you have covered it, Maria. Anything, Pedro, from your side?
Yeah, well, thank you for this opportunity. I think that we can compare some of the frugal innovations in the study case, but it would be better to have other success cases from other parts of the global south, which could provide us with better insight about how these frugal innovations are tackling COVID-19.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So this is something that I think what we are, of course, going to do. We're going to like continue on this and then add more examples to our work to do further research on that. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Rafael, do we have questions from YouTube or here?
Hey, Vipashi, we still have no questions either here or in YouTube. So if you want to the attendees who want to write any question in the question box or in the chat box, any clarification.
Yeah.
So or either we can move to the discussion.
Yeah, so we can open up for a broader discussion based on all three presentations. But I have one sort of question for Maria, Venkata, and Pedro, and that's related to policy support. So as you know, Wilhelmina was talking about policy, the kind of government level policy and policy, innovation policy. Versolo was also talking about the national budget and the kind of policy and financial support that innovations and experimentation generally benefit from. So I was wondering, in your research, which is very much focused on, kind of bottom-up experimentation, what sort of policy support have you found to support these initiatives in the different contexts? And also related to that is because you have been comparing across different countries. So you have been collecting data from Brazil, Chile, and Netherlands. So I was also wondering whether you have observed any sort of differences or any sort of comparison that you can do across the countries in terms of more top-down policy support or maybe regional policy support for frugal innovations in these countries?
Basically, in general, especially bottom-up frugal innovations, they happen without policy incentives. Like this is in general, but then in the case of tackling with COVID, there have been calls, like in the case of Brazil, calls for development of like solutions, especially focusing on ventilators, but also mobilization of volunteers and at the universities to produce different equipment like the face shields and some platforms for registry and so on. But I think often the higher end solutions, they are promoted by, or the academia have more interest to get involved in solutions that are higher tech, let's say. But then with this, we can witness that with the context and the awareness of the politicians, there has been development, and this is also something that like it's a lesson from these cases.
Yes, absolutely. No, I totally agree, and I also feel that there has. I mean, so that's why I have been asking this, because I feel that there is a increasing recognition of grassroots innovation in the kind of science, technology, innovation policy.
Yes.
But to what extent it's been pushed or it's been incentivized from a policy perspective is something that maybe we should question, and we should try to find out.
Something I can also mention here that is, especially with respect to health technologies, the bar/threshold is higher with respect to regulations and so on and so forth, be it FDA approval or like CE mark or like whatever they are. So in some of these cases, even in the European countries, and also even more so in countries like in Latin America and Asia and Africa, they are, I think the policy has been to like give some leniency, especially with respect to things like these ventilators and so on, to like make it a priority. So I think there is a balance between like there will be some kind of hurdle probably, but the threshold is made lower, is what I believe is happening from the policy side.
Right, that's very interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, so that was my kind of question, because I always think in terms of, and we also had a previous webinar around this kind of policy learning across contexts. So this is really something that I wanted to connect, because you have been talking about a lot of grassroots innovations, frugal innovations, and how that connects to policy learning is something that is worth thinking about, I guess.
Yeah, and I would like to emphasize if the people from the audience can contribute with contacts of cases that we could enlarge the basis, especially in Africa and Asia, to compare this context and also the solutions. And we were wondering if there will be like one or a small set of ventilators that will come to the fore to be established as like the models of frugal innovation of ventilators that can be more disseminated. Now we are in an environment with different types of experimentation. Like we could see 3 different approaches, but delivering exactly the same result with more or less cost and more or less utilizing local supplies. But then like how they have found this balance, like creating affordable solutions that deliver like a good level of care, and like to see a curve, and that is just by knowing other experiments would allow us to.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I would also encourage those who are attending, and we can also publicize through our mailing list, from our network mailing list, inviting people to come forward if they know of organizations and contacts in other countries who might be able to help you with your research. So that's also the purpose of this network. So definitely feel free to use the platform to get help. So I would definitely help that. So just to kind of open up the discussion, I mean, so we have, I don't know whether we still have Wilhelmina with us, because she said she will have to leave. But basically, I was thinking of a kind of a broad question for discussion. And this is because the theme of the webinar is local experimentation. Because the concept of local experimentation comes from this transitions language, right? So we talk about niche innovations and niche experimentation, and how that is very, very vital for any sort of durable change to happen. So, so my main question to, I guess, any of you can pick up, is to think about how, again, coming from a policy perspective. So how do you think policies or innovation policies, or maybe energy policy, or even sectoral policies can support experimentation in a new world? So we are moving into a new world after the crisis. So what sort of initiatives, so how do we understand the kind of transformative potential of experimentation? Because of course we say that there is lots of new initiatives, lots of new projects happening, but is there a way that you can think, either in the case of urban mobility, for the case of Versolo, or maybe for Wilhelmina, it's about EWaste management, and for you, it's about new ways of providing healthcare either through ventilators or other sort of low-tech innovations. How do we understand? How does one understand the kind of real transformative potential of experimentation? This is a broad question, but you can think of your own experience of working in your cases. How do you know that a particular experimentation or a particular project has a potential for scalability, has a potential for making real change in society? Anyone who wants to?
Yeah,
think
probably I
about
can. Yeah, I can start. Yeah, actually, yeah, regarding experimentation, the reason why I mentioned in the presentation why the innovations that were implemented in the old normal, the implementation started like many years ago. For example, the Jeepney reform that was even back 2003. And then, so there are a lot of studies like trying to support the, especially by GIZ on the Jeepney modernization. So I think from where I'm coming from, they are not, these experiments, they are not radically like totally new. There have been like a number of studies, but the problem is really the implementation. So yeah, bus reform like BRT, it's already supported by experiences from all over the world. Jeepney reform and then cycling. Yeah, so so that's my that's where I'm coming from. So they're not completely radically new ideas, but what's important is to scale it up, implement it.
I would like to add, Vars, that they are not new, but context-wise, and the change in behavior that they promote, and so then they have then some component of new. I think this is one aspect of these local experimentations, and often I see also the way that the organizations have organized themselves to produce the solutions are something new, not new in context of developed countries. When we are talking, it's very easy for the whole society to understand, for example, about industry university cooperation, just to cite one example. Whereas in many developing country context, this is not happening.
Yeah, that's true. So that's I mean, those are very important points. So one thing is about implementation, the way things are implemented, even though it's not radically new, those challenges. And also, as you say, Maria, it's about whether it's new in the context, whether it solves certain contextual problems. That makes experimentation relevant. Yeah. So I think Rafael, did you have a question? Do you want to ask the question?
Well, it's not right. It's not just a question to Maria, but kind of, and I'm asking if she's interested in other health tech innovations besides ventilators. I ask that because it seems to me that my university has some testing initiative going on. It's not on my department, but I would look forward to know better and share some contacts with Maria.
Which university are you, Rafael?
I'm both in Positivo University and Paraná Federal University in southern Brazil. I'm related to both institutions.
Okay, yeah, I haven't known of other solutions in Brazil, especially in Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. But in Paraná, there was an initiative, I don't know if from the university, the Federal University, in the engineering department of another ventilator.
Mm-hmm.
But please get in contact. I would be definitely interested to know more. But we would like also to expand the basis to allow for like more context comparison of Africa and Asia, for example. But definitely also welcome from Brazil case.
Yeah. One of my questions has also been following up on Rafael's question. Also makes me think that do you feel, as you are researching on healthcare innovations and specifically now focusing on ventilators, and you also mentioned masks, do you feel, and this is a question from someone who is completely unexperienced in healthcare, do you feel that there is so these innovations are coming at a cost of investment in other forms of medication or other forms of healthcare services. So generally there is this discussion that, okay, there is a lot of, because of COVID-19, there has been a lot of neglect around other health issues. So do you also feel, and do you have a hunch for that, okay, there is a lot of investment and there's lots of funds at the moment for services and equipments specific to COVID and COVID symptoms, while which is at the cost of, say, other equipment or other sort of medications, or even scientific innovations around, I don't know, mental health, issues with mental health, or other sorts of diseases, or even cancer research. So do you see that tension?
Well, I think it's too short time to say like what is being neglected, because we would, I would say we would see through impact. But like I'm going to say what has happened in Finland, for example, and this has been, I know, in other countries, that non-critical treatment have been postponed. People have been motivated not to go to the health station, and like not having the face-to-face contact with your doctor and all those things, they have implications. And I think in terms of the mental impact, like mental health impact, and I've seen literature that it's difficult to estimate the range of impact and the depth of them just due to COVID, both from people who have been in isolation to people who have been in intensive care, to those who have lost loved ones and could not have a proper funeral. Just like it's gonna be quite important impact. In the case of Brazil, I think there's one situation that like we are seeing both in health and education, the budget being cut, the planned batch for next year, for example, being cut and diverted part of it even to defense. I have a very critical view on that, and this is not due to COVID or so. It's just the political direction that the country is taking, and this is also for other ones. But definitely, like as the resources are limited, they have either for COVID or to other areas, and so they have to be shifted, yeah. And therefore something might be, if not neglected completely, postponed.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point, and I really appreciate your point in the fact that, okay, so there is an immediate need, there's an immediate urgency for these innovations. And same for, and I'm sure, I mean, I think it's the same for urban mobility as well, that, okay, there is an immediate need for, you know, to avoid contact, to do social distancing. So that's why maybe there is a sudden shift of thinking of how do we move from more shared form of transportation to, say, bicycling. So in many cities around the world, there's this new initiatives around bicycling and other forms of non-shared individual forms of mobility. And same for, you know, in your case, there's a sudden emphasis, there's a critical emphasis on ventilation issues or innovations around issues to tackle lungs-related problems. To say, so there's always, of course, this is a shock. This is a in transitions language, we can say that this is a landscape shock that has kind of forced us to focus on certain things at the cost of other things. But then for experimentation to scale and to sustain and to actually make a durable, radical change in society, we need to think about which of these experimentation or which of these innovations will stay, and whether they, and if these are sustainable changes, whether they will stay, and how can we support their durability and sustainability, you know, as a project. So yeah, so that's one of the big questions I still don't have answer to from my own.
One aspect that we mentioned, and we are not original in that, is the knowledge that has been generated. I think this is like when especially people in the academia have devoted to find solutions that can be deployed quickly and cheaply. You start by circumventing challenges and then focusing on what is the core, what this solution has to deliver. And one of our interviewees mentioned this fact: we had no experience in working in this topic, and all of a sudden we just got all together and start developing this ventilator. And I think this is like, and also not only the ventilator, but also the supply chain, local supply chain for it. And then I see the impact in the industry. Okay, we can do it because we have specialized suppliers locally. And the same goes for, I believe, for tests. When you develop new knowledge in order to attend this emergency situation. And this, I believe, can be deployed to many other ways. I just hope that the one aspect that especially Pedro found in the case in Chile was that like the time pressure has been so big and the resources so limited, even if not financially, but in personal installations, that people were working like 24 hours almost uninterruptedly. And this is like one aspect that we could have better equipped installations and but more people to be involved. But this idea of having a challenge-driven innovation, it's a lot deployed by companies, but then we are talking about a societal challenge, and this is interesting. And just changing a bit, I see that Wilhelmina had posed here a question: is it possible to have a research team to write a proposal around these discussions on innovation healthcare? Definitely, Wilhelmina, we will be in contact for that. It's there are many works already in this topic, but we would like to deepen the discussion. We could have later on a talk on this.
Perfect. Yeah, that's really good. I was going to ask the question, but yeah.
Oh, sorry.
You picked it up. No, great. That's great that you picked it up, and I'm pretty sure there will be opportunity. So that's also something that I would like to close with by saying that we have 2 more webinars to go in this series on this COVID-19 themed webinar series that we are hosting this year. So our main kind of webinar theme is, of course, sustainability transitions in the global south in context of COVID. But every month, as you know, this month the focus has been local experimentation. Next month we will focus on informality. So we will maybe pick up on some of the issues we talked about, issues around informal mobility, issues around frugality maybe. But yes, so the main theme next month would be specifically on informality. And we will have to think about, we are still kind of looking for a set of speakers like you guys. So feel free to drop a line if you are interested to speak. That's next month. And in December, the final webinar of the series will be on the role of state, very important topic, on the role of state and public institutions. So we would like to also hear from you about the role of governments in tackling COVID, but anything, so the role of state could be on local experimentation, could be on policy in context of COVID, of course. So those are our next two webinars. And as you know, webinars of our series happens on the first Wednesday of every month. So I think the next one is on the 4th of November, and that would be on informality. And following that, we are also looking for suggestions on how to actually make sense of all these discussion, all these knowledge generation that we are that is happening through these webinars. So we have all these recordings, and we are really creating a very nice community of scholars who are presenting their research and reflections on COVID-19 Global South transitions. So we really want to kind of follow up. So that's something that I have been thinking together with my colleagues in the webinar organizing team on how to follow up, how to actually maybe write a publication, or maybe think about a publication, or maybe think about other sorts of policy briefs or reports, or any sort of follow-up on this conversation that we are having every month. So if you have ideas as panelists, also as attendees, if you have ideas on how to make sense of all this discussion across all the webinars, so you're more than welcome to drop us a line and see whether we can collaborate in terms of writing a report, or in summarizing the discussion. That's definitely something I would really consider doing. With that note, we are well, it's 3 o'clock in UK, so I think we are just past 2 hours. Unless there is any sort of last point that you want to make, I would like to thank you all. So I would like to thank you, Wilhelmina, Pars, Maria, Venkata, and Pedro, for your really, really interesting and thought-provoking presentations. And I really definitely look forward to follow up with you on these discussions and on these topics. So thank you very much, and thank you to all attendees for joining us. Thanks.
Thank you from our side as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.